Hello, hello. Okay, so today we're going to go over some art tips and a little bit about the process that I use whenever I draw. In advance, I just want to apologize if I sound really congested. My allergies are going crazy right now. So I think to start off, let's talk a little bit about line art and some settings that I make sure I have turned on before I go to line my drawings. Okay, so first things first, you want to make sure that you have what's called shape dynamics turned on for your brush. Right now I am just using the hard round that comes pre-installed with Photoshop, and you can find the shape dynamics by opening the brush settings panel. If you don't know where to find that, you can click this little kind of silver folder icon with the brush on it. I have it right here in a little window just for easy access. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And right here, you can see that shape dynamics is clicked, so it's turned on. You want to make sure that the control is set to pin pressure. You can play some with minimum diameter. I usually just leave it turned to 0. So to give you a demonstration of what this does is it basically means that the lighter you press with your pen, the thinner the line's going to be, and as you add pressure, it'll get thicker. And just to give you a little demonstration too of what your line art might look like, if this is something that you're struggling to get this kind of look in your line art where you have these nice tapers, you know, if you're drawing fur, maybe the points of the fur are a little thinner. And I would clean this up more personally, but you know, let's say you're trying to draw an eye, so you want the underside of the brow to be a little thicker to suggest that's where the shadow is. You would have the eyelashes, the eye, let's just say, I'm drawing some anime today, and maybe you would do the lower lid a little thinner, something like that. You know, that's more interesting to look at and much easier for the eye to understand than if you had a lot of lines all the same width, you know, competing for your attention. It would start to look really cramped really fast. And this just doesn't look as nice as this. Okay, so a couple of more settings that we want to make sure are in place. There's a little icon right here next to opacity. You want to make sure that is not selected. It will look like that if it is. And what that means is kind of like how your pen pressure controlled the width of the lines. In this way, pen pressure will also control how see-through or how what's the word I'm looking for, like solid your lines are. And this, I sometimes use this for sketching, but you really don't want to use it for line art because it doesn't look quite as nice as it could. I mean, there are some styles that could certainly make use of this, but for the most part, I don't recommend it. It encourages drawing over the same line again and again to try to make it really dark like it should be from the outset. So make sure that that is not selected. One other thing that you want to be careful with too, if you're just starting out with digital art, it can be really tempting to use the smoothing feature right here. And what this does is it's basically Photoshop's way of helping you draw really stable looking lines instead of lines that kind of wiggle. But there are some downsides to that, and one of them is that you are not developing dexterity on your own. Which is a great skill to have, and a really great way to improve your art is if you can draw really nice, clean, controlled lines by yourself without using this. So if you're just getting started, it's totally okay if you do want to use that for a time. I would recommend try sticking to like maybe 25% or less smoothing so that you're getting some assistance from Photoshop, but it's not extreme. And I'll kind of show you why in a minute. So to give you an example, I'm going to set the smoothing really, really high just so that the camera can hopefully pick up on it. So if I go to try to draw a curve, like you can see the gap between where my pen tip is and where the line is. I did not pick up my pen until somewhere about right here, but as you can see, it left this whole gap right here because it's trying so hard to make sure that this curve is nice and smooth. It's really not following what I'm doing, and you want to make sure that you have control over your lines, not Photoshop. Okay, so as mentioned, we do kind of want to stay away from smoothing. And one of the reasons why people rely on that is because chances are they're drawing from their wrist instead of with their whole arm as a unit. Drawing with your whole arm and controlling your mark making by using your shoulder instead of your wrist will give you much more stable, confident looking lines. I can go ahead and demonstrate that too. You can kind of see a difference. So I'm going to draw some really long lines across this canvas right now, and I'm going to be drawing from my shoulder. So I'm moving my whole arm all at once. Okay, so you can see how these lines, there's not a whole lot of wobbling going on. You know, pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to try to do the same thing, just flexing my wrist like this. And you'll realize pretty soon it's hard to keep a long line like this going whenever you start to pivot from the wrist. It's like you've got to pick up, you've got to start again. You know, your lines don't look nearly as confident, and especially if we zoom in, you can see there's a lot of wobbling going on in here versus these lines, which are much straighter and more confident looking. This is going to improve your art a whole lot if you can learn to draw from your elbow and use your whole arm in one big fluid motion. Okay, so that being said about drawing in one big fluid motion, a lot of times whenever I go to line a piece of art, and let's say there's a long line that I have to draw, number one, I'm not necessarily concerned with making it, you know, totally perfect in the right spot on the first try, I mean. So it's totally okay if you need to, you know, Control Z or undo wherever you have your shortcut set up. I have it set up in these little buttons on the side of my tablet. So, you know, for instance, the underside of the tail right here, I would probably do this in about 2 strokes because it looks like there's a little bit of an angle change right there between that line and this line. So for example, I think I'm going to try to do one big line right here, draw another one right here, and then I can erase if they end up overlapping. Another tip I have too is you can, instead of trying to draw with your drawing, you know, straight up and down as it normally is, you can rotate your canvas to help you out. So that's going to be R if you're using a tablet connected to a computer. If you just hold down R on your keyboard, which again, I have it set up as a shortcut on the buttons on my tablet, you can flip your drawing around and draw however is most comfortable for you. Like, I definitely am not going to worry about drawing this like right side up all the time. If you need to reset your drawing as well, there's a little button up here. Whenever you have R held down, it says reset view. It'll snap your drawing back into place. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to line the underside of this tail real quick, and I'll just give you an example of those big long strokes I was talking about. So I'll try to do, you know, that didn't quite reach all the way up there, so I'm going to undo. Maybe I'll come from that side. That looks okay. That looks pretty good to me. So I think what I'm going to do now is rotate it again, kind of move that. And the way you can move around your canvas too is if you hold spacebar down. I also have that set to a button shortcut. So, you know, if you're just flicking your drawing around, it helps a lot. So I have that line drawn. Let's try to do this one. Let me see. Okay, something like that. I feel like that follows the line of the sketch pretty good. So what I would do at this point is just take your eraser, kind of smooth out where they meet. You know, it looks like it's getting a little thin right there, so I might go build it up again. Oops, excuse that. Oh my goodness, stop. Okay. Sometimes my tablet buttons get stuck, so it's just being ridiculous right now. So yeah, so that's kind of how I line. I wouldn't worry too much about, you know, trying to get it right on the first try or anything. You just keep at it. Do it as many times as you need until you're happy with where the line falls based on your sketch. Okay, so another little trick that I wanted to show you is if you're concerned about getting your lines really smooth and really neat looking, there is a way to give the illusion that they are like that without having to worry about actually drawing them that way, and that is to take your image and enlarge it and draw the lines while it's enlarged and then shrink it back down to its regular size. So for example, this image right here is 7 by 5 inches in size. Let's go ahead and make it 400 times its normal size, okay? And if you want these two numbers to maintain their ratio and change at the same time, just make sure that this little link is selected right here. So I'm going to hit OK. And as you can see, our image just got really, really big. So I'm going to go ahead and pretend like I'm inking this, and I'm not going to try to be super clean and have a super steady hand or anything like that. All right, so kind of gotten some of the facial features drawn, some of the cheek fur. There's definitely some places like right here, right there, maybe right here I would clean up more. But for the sake of this example, I'm going to kind of leave it messy so you can see how this trick works. So if you remember, we had made our image 400 times its normal size. So now we need to divide 100 by 4, which would be 25%. Or if you recall, it was 7 by 5 inches in size. So we can just type that back in and hit OK. Drag our image back into view. So this is now at 100%. And as you can see, these lines look a whole lot cleaner now that they've been reduced than whenever we drew them at 400% its original size. So this is a little trick that can help you out if you're concerned with the quality of your line art. Just draw big and basically cheat, and then once you resize it, it'll look way crisper and way neater. To kind of give you another example of how resizing your image can work in your favor, so this is a commission that I did for somebody. And whenever I create artwork for a commissioner, I always draw it at what's called print resolution, which means that the image, the resolution is set to 300 pixels per inch. And this just ensures that it's large enough and has enough quality to where if my commissioner wanted to print it out, it would look good. But I also provide them with a scaled down version of the drawing that they can go post online or put on their character's profile. And the way that you would do that is you would reduce 300. This is print resolution. Typically for the internet or screens, it's only going to have 72 pixels per inch. So if you hit OK, as you can see, it just got a whole lot smaller. I'm going to undo that. And I actually have the smaller one right here, so you can see visually how much it shrinks down. So chances are too, if you're viewing someone's artwork on the internet, if you're viewing mine in particular, this is the version you're going to see versus this large version that I've given to the commissioner. So it's really, once I shrink it down, everything's going to really get really crisp and tightened up. Okay, so something else that I wanted to add was that whenever I am lining my drawings, some of how you do your line art can come down to like your personal taste and what you want your art to look like. So for example, when I was younger, I would use the hard round to line my drawings, but I kind of have evolved into this stage where I really want my line art to be delicate and thin and have a little bit of texture to it. So the brush that I actually use is, it's part of Kyle's Mega Pack, which you can download. It comes with the paid subscription version of Photoshop CC. I believe the one I use is right here, the HB pencil. It comes in a few different sizes, like this is the 5 pixel, 7 pixel, 10 pixel. I usually stick to the 5 or 7. So for example, right now this is a commission that I have, and this would be a character that I'm drawing. Something that I try to just focus on is, as mentioned, redoing lines as much as I need. If I don't get it right the first time, that's okay. Just undo it or erase it. Something else I focus on too is like as pieces of fur come to their point, you can see I kind of have the lines taper off and get, a little thinner, a little lighter. Same thing back here where they overlap. Doing this is just really gonna bring your line art to the next level if you have these tapering ends like that. And zoomed in here as well, you can kind of see the texture I was talking about. I like my art to look, you know, a little bit hand-drawn, a little bit almost like this soft watercolor quality. So I really like this brush for that because it adds, you know, more of an organic feel versus this hard default Photoshop, almost like, you know, robotic technological look to it. Okay, so moving on to color tips. I'm going to show you how I prepare a drawing to color. We're going to pretend like the drawing I just showed you, like we just have the line art here. Let's act like we're going to just start coloring this from scratch now. So you're going to have your lines layer and underneath it your background. I like to make a layer called base, which is where I'm going to draw all the markings in on the character and everything. And for this, basically, we're just going to get the general shape of the character filled in so that we can apply markings and colors and all of that on top of it. So what I like to do at this stage is select the entire canvas. So you can go to select all. The keyboard shortcut is Control A, but in case if you're not on a keyboard, you can, I mean, if you're not using a tablet with a keyboard, you can find it right here. So that's going to select your entire canvas. What I do after this is I go to the magic wand tool, which is right here. And there are a couple of settings that we need to make sure are turned on for this to work. The first one is that you want to make sure you have the third option selected. So what this is going to do, it's going to remove whatever you click on from this big selection. So we're going to be clicking around the character to get the selection to conform to the line art. Secondly, you want to make sure your tolerance is set to a specific amount. Basically what this is it's the program looking for a difference between the pixels in the image. So right now we have black line art on a white background. The tolerance is basically how much the program is willing to say, oh, these pixels are different. I need to stop right here. I need to stop the selection right here. So the higher the tolerance, the more the program is going to ignore different colored pixels. So you want to keep it fairly low. I usually have success keeping it around like 10 to 20 maybe. So right now I have it set to 12. Basically, the thicker your line art is, the higher you can go with the tolerance because there's less chance of the program saying, you know, what is this pixel? What's the difference? My line art can be really, really thin sometimes. Like for example, if you look at this back heel right here, it's really thin right there. That's why I tend to keep it low because there's a chance the program could say, okay, this is getting light into like gray. It can't quite differentiate that. So that's what tolerance does. That's going to come into play in a second. I'll show you how it works. Another thing you want to make sure is that anti-aliasing is turned on. This is going to make your edges look smooth versus like really hard pixels. The second thing you want to have selected is right here. This is going to select what's called contiguous pixels. That's basically where whenever we go to deselect all this white space around the character, if this is not turned on, the program's going to say, oh, you want to deselect everything that's white. So it's also going to deselect everything in between the lines, and we don't want that. We just want it to conform to the shape of the character on the outside. The last thing you want to make sure is turned on is this little option right here. This is going to look at all of the layers in your file versus just the one that you're on. So because we're on the base layer, we want the program to also say, okay, I see that you have lines up here too, even though you're not on that layer. It's going to read them as well when it goes to make the final selection. The final selection. Okay. Okay, I know that was kind of a lot, so if you need to go back and listen to that, absolutely feel free to do that. We're going to see how it all comes into play right now. So you have the magic wand selected. We're going to do a negative selection, this little third option right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this outer selection, in that where it's outer white. Okay, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore, guys. Okay, anyway, you get the point. Now, if you notice, something happened here. It's selected inside of this ear. If you can see, the little moving selection edges have deselected this ear rim. And the reason for that is because I have an opening in my line art right here. Okay, I left this open on purpose because sometimes this happens to us, and I just want to show you my workaround for it. So I'm gonna undo. The selection has gone back to being on the outer edge of the canvas. Now, there's a couple of things you can do for this. You can go back to your lines layer, and you can just fill that sucker in. Or while you're on your color layer, you know, whatever your base color is going to be, let's say it's like we're just gonna use bright pink because it's easy for me to see. I'm gonna go ahead and draw that on the color layer, because like sometimes you might want your line art to have openings to look really spontaneous or organic, like someone drew it and they didn't get it all perfect or whatever. Sometimes I'll do that. So I'll just put it on the color layer, and because we have this option selected for the magic wand tool, it's going to read all the layers at once. So it says, okay, I see you have that pink part drawn on the base layer. I see you have lines. It's going to read them all at the same time. So let's try that again. We're going to deselect that white space. And that looks like it conformed to our character. I don't see it going inside of the lines anywhere. So that's what we wanted. So what I do next is, if you notice, if you go ahead and use the paint bucket and fill it in. Okay, sorry about that. Someone came in to ask me something. Okay, so after you filled it in with your paint bucket, what this does is it has made the color reach to the edge of the lines as well. And if you hide your line layer, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but there's something I like to do on top of making the selection conform to the character. It'll make sure that your colors are centered under the lines, basically, instead of reaching all the way outside, because sometimes you can get some really wonky looking stuff if you do it that way. So let's go ahead and undo the paint bucket. So at this point, we are at the stage where we've conformed it to our line art. You can go to Select, Modify, Contract. Just put contract by 1 pixel. That's, I've always had success with that. So go ahead and click OK. And if you watch, I don't know if you can see that with the camera, but the selection shrunk by 1 pixel. So instead of being all the way on the edge of the line art, you can see that it's a little more centered inside of the line instead of being where the outer pixels are. Okay, so at this point, I would take the paint bucket tool, click, fill the whole thing in, and hit deselect, which is Control D on your keyboard, and that'll get rid of the selection. But we're not quite done yet setting up the base color. If you notice, this comes with, you know, drawing characters with fur and hair and stuff. It's left some little marks right here between where the tufts of fur are. So what I do at that point is just take the eraser tool, you know, just set it to something fairly small, like 5 or 6, whatever. I would just go in here, and it's a little time consuming, but it'll definitely make your art look a lot cleaner if you just clean up these little pieces like that. All right, so for demonstration purposes, I'm not gonna sit here and do that for all of them, but let's just pretend that I've cleaned up all of these little fur areas. Okay, so the next thing that I would do is whenever I go to do markings on a character, I use what's called clipping masks, and it's great because now that we have our base layer defined, clipping masks allow you to draw things on top of the base layer without it extending past those pixels. So hit New Layer, right click, Create Clipping Mask to give you a demonstration. You know, let's use some blue. I'm gonna make the brush really big so you can see. So at this point, even if I color on the character, it doesn't go past the base layer, what we've already defined as the base layer. Okay, so at this point, I will create clipping masks for basically any markings that the character has. I'll also put the things like the brows and the nose and the lips and the mouth, the eyes, all of those, I'll put those on their own layer as well towards the top, so they sit on top of the colors. I'll go ahead and give you a demonstration. So let's just, oh, I can't type. Just say this is the nose layer. So go ahead and color that in. Okay, so I'm not being too careful with this, just for demonstration purposes, but you get the idea. Something like I would maybe put things that are going to be the same color or similar color on the same layer. So let's make this character look a little bit more natural. Let's give her, you know, like some dark brown brows and eyelashes and stuff. So I'll just call this like brows, nose, lips, whatever. Okay, and then after that, what I'll do is add another layer. If you select your base layer and you already have a layer set to a clipping mask, if you hit New Layer, it'll automatically do the same for it because it's underneath this one. So let's call this one you know, face markings or something like that. I'm also going to change the color of the base. So something that you can do similar to a clipping mask is you can lock the transparent pixels by using this little icon right here. And that's basically going to do the same thing, where if you draw or color, it's not going to go past the pixels you've already created for the base layer. So let's say this is like a different character than the one that someone commissioned before. Let's say she has like kind of cream fur or something. So if I take that, I have the transparency locked, just going to color that in like that, and it didn't bleed out past the character. Okay, so I've quickly gone ahead and just added in the eyes and the mouth, and I've put those things on their own layer set to a clipping mask. So for instance, you can see for this one, I have the irises and the teeth on top of the mouth and the whites of the eyes, just kind of following to how they're layered in the drawing. So the teeth are in front of the mouth. I'll put the mouth behind that layer that has the teeth on it. It just keeps things really nice and organized. Okay, so going back to the face markings layer, as you can see too, I have that below these things because again, they sit on top of the colors, and it's just much easier to color beneath these very focal points of the character. So that's another piece of advice that I have. So let's just say that this character has like some kind of gold facial markings. At this point, even though I've used the brush that has some texture to do the lines, I'll go ahead and stick with just the hard round to color in the markings. So I'll set the brush kind of small, like maybe 6 or 7 or something like that. And I'll go ahead and just start coloring. So let's say the ears are rimmed in gold. Let's say those are where the gold markings are for this character. And let's say that she has some lighter muzzle markings or something. Let's just do that. You can't really see that too well. Let me go a little lighter. Okay, I think that's pretty good for the lighter markings. Actually, let me extend that. Looks a bit silly. If you can hear my cat, he wants to be fed because it's his dinner time in about 20 minutes. He's crying outside my door. Okay, let me go ahead and finish this up. All right, so let's just say these are this character's markings. What I would do at this point is kind of what we did for the base layer. I would lock the transparency of these marking layers. You know, let's just pretend that I had the whole character colored in with like these flat basic markings. Okay, what I would do at this point is I would start to add kind of that gradient effect that I do with my art. So if I wanted to do that for the gold markings, I might come in here and find a slightly darker, slightly more red hue, like that. Make sure I'm on the right layer. I would use the selection tool over here to isolate, you know, this ear, and then I might do the next one. I would go to the general brushes that come with Photoshop, select this one, soft round pressure opacity. Make it fairly big. Since we have transparency locked and also the ear is isolated, it won't bleed into other parts of the drawing. So what I might do is if the light's hitting the character from up here, I'll go ahead and kind of airbrush the bottoms of the ears to be darker. And then what I might do is make the tops a little lighter. Something like that. And what I would do too is, I'm not really doing it right now for the demonstration, but I would have these colors selected over here as a palette basically. So I would continue to use the same colors for every part and use the eyedropper tool to switch between them. So let's see, where were we? Face markings. All right, let me go ahead and isolate the bridge of the nose. And maybe this character's nose marking gets a little darker towards the nose. So I'll go ahead and do something like that. Maybe it's a little bit lighter where it fades into that cream. And in fact, what I might do is go ahead and select the cream and do something like that with the airbrush so it really blends into it nicely like that. Okay, and that's kind of how I color. I can go ahead and do muzzle as well, just to give you a little demonstration. Now, let's say we're going to do the shadow of the eye sockets right here. Something like that, just where it's a little darker at the top. Same thing for the inner ears. If the light is hitting it up here, I might use this darker color at the base, just to kind of give the illusion of like some shading and some form, even though I don't do a whole lot of actual shading in my art. That's just how I approach coloring. It kind of gives it this soft, a little bit of a watercolor feel, like I mentioned before, and that's just my personal taste, so definitely experiment if you want to do shading or anything like that. I can show you real quick too how I would handle that. Okay, so for shading, what I would do is I would make a new layer on top of all of the color layers. Go ahead and name it shading. Let's see. And this is going to get into like lighting and color theory and stuff, but if you're just drawing a cartoon or whatever, really the main advice I would give for shading is just don't use black. Use something other than that. Maybe it's a little tinted towards red or blue or purple or whatever. You might not want to use a super vibrant red or blue or whatever, but give it a little bit of color. That's just going to really make it pop. I think for this character, if I was going to shade this character, if it's a lot of warm colors like creams and golds and yellows and everything, I would maybe go for a shadow that also has those, just to keep everything within the same color family basically. So let's just say something like that, kind of like a red that's more going towards gray. And what I would do is use the hard round. Let's go a little smaller than that. Okay, and for shading too, you can set your layer to multiply. Now, it'll look pretty dark whenever you first start off. I usually like to leave it dark like this just to see what I'm doing. But let's say, you know, let me get a few little areas patched in here real quick. All right, let's say this ear has some shadow right there as well. Something like that. So basically, once you would have all your shadows in place, what I would do to make it actually look good, now that you're not so concerned with just seeing where you're painting in the shadows, so I would turn the opacity lighter, maybe something like 25%. You know, just whatever you think looks good, whatever fits your drawing. All right, so once you have your shading too, if you're interested in adding like the little sparkles on the eyes, what I would do is above your lines layer, add a layer. I usually call it shinies. Most of the time, I don't use stark white for this either. If the shadows are like more of a red, I might choose a cooler color to offset that, like a blue or something. For the case of this character though, again, if I really wanted the character to feel warm and, you know, cozy, I might use a warm color for the highlight as well. So like maybe a very, very light yellow. Zoom in a little bit. Draw the shine on the nose. Okay, and at this point, I would definitely be adding more effects. I would be doing some final adjustments to my art. If you want a more in-depth tutorial, I can try to do that as well, but I think for the most part, this is definitely enough to get you started, maybe get you some results that you're looking for in your own art. So yeah, that's a glimpse into my process, and if you have any more questions or anything, just let me know, and I'll try to answer them.